Electoral integrity is deeply tied to active participation of both labor organizations and the wider citizenry in Nigeria. Labor unions have a strong history of influencing political processes, from advocating for fair electoral laws to mobilizing workers for civil engagement. Their influence can shape public policy and pressure political actors to uphold transparency and fairness in elections. Meanwhile, citizens hold the power to demand accountability by participating in elections, monitoring voting processes, and rejecting irregular practices like vote buying and electoral violence. However, despite advocacies by labor unions and citizens, challenges such as voter suppression, electoral malpractice, and political intimidation remain significant hurdles to achieving full electoral integrity. Tonight, we shall examine the critical roles labor citizens play in ensuring credible elections in our country, and will ask pertinent questions on how their involvement can be strengthened, what actions are needed to make electoral progress more transparent and accountable. I am Ezenwa. Welcome to Electoral Reform Half Hour on Nta News24. This program is brought to you by Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa with support from MacArthur Foundation. So, joining us today is Comrade John Oda, former General Secretary, Nigerian Labour Congress, a prominent figure in Nigeria's labor movement. Comrade Oda is known for his commitment to workers' rights and his significant role in promoting political engagement through labor unions. His leadership in NLC helped strengthen the voice of Nigerian workers in the political landscape, making him a respected advocate for labor reforms. It's my extreme pleasure to welcome you to this program, Comrade John Oda.
Thank you, Oga. It's my pleasure to be here.
When your boss calls you your guard, then there is trouble. I just think that you are suited for today's conversation because of not just the fact that you've played very prominent role in labor, but also your deep-rooted, involvement in civil society actions as we come. In what ways do you believe labor unions and civil society can effectively serve as watchdogs during elections to ensure transparency and integrity in elections?
Thank you, and once again, I'm happy to be on your program. As you know, if we are to take the last 25 years of our democratic journey, the trade unions and civil society were in the forefront, one of trying to bring about the current democracy that we're in. And by January 1999, when Adams Oshiomhole became president of the Nigeria Labour Congress, we had an engagement when Olufalaye and Obasanjo were nominated as the presidential candidates of their respective parties. We had what we called the presidential parley at the old Sheraton Hotel, Ladikwali Hall, where we brought 1,000 workers and had a panel to interview then candidate Obasanjo and the following day candidate Olufalaye. And in that panel was Atahiru Jega, who eventually became chair of INEC and did a lot of reforms. And also our founding president, Hassan Sumonu, among those who interviewed President Obasanjo. And what we sought to do then was to interrogate their manifestos and to see in what way they will relate with the issues which were pertinent to the electorate and also our immediate constituency, which was the working people. And I recall that what eventually became the ICPC came out of a question Professor Atahiru Jega posed to candidate Obasanjo, where he said that, look, corruption has become very endemic in our country. What will you do if you were elected president? And I remember that President Obasanjo did say that, look, he had two immediate experiences in mind: the Commission Against Corruption in India and the one in South Africa, and that if he become president, he will set up a commission on against corruption.
Of that nature.
And when he became president, we took him up on his words and had engagement with him, and that gave birth to ICPC as a commission. And then subsequently, when he saw that ICPC didn't address all the issues, then came EFCC. So I've recounted this to underscore the fact that where you have an enlightened leadership of organized labor, they will contribute very positively to our aspirations to have a very credible electoral process, very credible monitoring process. And I also recall that during that 1999 election, the Nigeria Labour Congress, by this time the NSC was the sole labor center in the country, sent 4,000 monitors to go around to monitor the elections around the country. And it was subsequently that other organizations started organizing Parley, but we had started it. And so the trade unions being the most active part of civil society, active in the sense that it has more membership, working with other segments of civil society who are specialized on the issue of election, do play active role in the electoral process. I'm sure that you will come to the reforms which the Yaradua government tried to do, where the Nigeria Labour Congress was asked to nominate a representative, and where I had the privilege of serving in the 22-person committee. But let me just stop it at that.
Yeah, so I like the template that you have put on the ground. My worry is that given the strong grassroots connections of labor unions, what do you consider the most effective strategies they can adopt to, initiate voters into the conversation of transparency in the electoral process?
I think that where you have the trade unions being very conscious of the role they need to play, they usually play them very effectively. But I want to remind our listeners that there was time in this country where the Nigerian Union of Teachers were relied almost exclusively to provide returning officers for our electoral process. And during the time of the military, the teachers did this without the type of problems that we have right now with the electoral process. And our experience in other countries where the trade unions were in the forefront of political education, to try to mobilize the citizens of their countries. For example, in Ghana and some other West African countries, you have increased participation of the citizens of this country, of those countries. And because when a worker is determined to become engaged actively in the political process by voting, the likelihood is that the dependent, his wife and adult children, will also follow suit. So we're not just talking about just one person.
You raised an issue, but I think the first, you know that the Jega intervention, where Jega had to outsource the role of returning officers to university teachers, had to do with the integrity deficit that what he met on the ground provided. So when you talk about the teachers, the sole reliance on teachers, and then putting it side by side, the enduring intervention, legacies of the Jega era, how do you then appreciate that? But that's not my big issue. My big issue is that for somebody like you who is deeply experienced and rooted in negotiations, there are issues on the table at the National Assembly. Diaspora voting, early voting, having elections in one day. We are not seeing labor, you know, the way we saw it in the kind of engagement that you talked about. What could be the challenge now? Why can't we use the power for negotiating for wages, negotiating for better living conditions for Nigeria that labor is known for, to push for electoral reforms?
Okay, let me first address the issue of how the teachers no longer were the focal point in terms of managing the electoral process. I think
yes.
I think what happened didn't have to do with the integrity of the teachers themselves, but people within the electoral management process. And you recall that NSU was very instrumental in the processes that led to the removal of the pharmacist who was chair of the
Professor
INEC, Professor Maurice Iwu. So, like you said, we're very conversant with the recent history, and the last thing I want to do is to cast aspersion on the teachers as being responsible. The problem of the reforms which eventually happened and which needed to be done didn't have to do with the teachers, as it were. Coming to Jega, Jega was part of the 22-person WACE electoral reform process.
Committee, yeah.
And together we spent about 18 months to go through around the country, consult, and made a number of the recommendations which the WACE Electoral Reform Commission came to be known with. And I think the role that organized labor played, apart from sitting there in all the days that the commission worked, after the Electoral Reform Committee finished its work and WACE submitted the report to the government, we, as organized labor, went a step further by going around the country to popularize the key recommendations of the WACE Electoral Reform Committee and asked all the stakeholders to buy into this and to ensure that they are implemented. I think one of the good things that we have to give to President Goodluck is the fact that he took a member of the Electoral Reform Committee, Professor Jega.
Like asking you to come and, if you make the recommendations,
yes, come and implement it.
Comrade John, you would have to hold your thoughts. We'll go on a short break. When we return, the Electoral Reform half hour continues shortly. Stay with us. exciting conversation with Comrade John Oda, former General Secretary of the Nigerian Labour Congress. You were sharing thoughts on the work that you did before.
Yes, I was then making the point that so when Jega was appointed chair of the Electoral Reform Committee, he presided over the 2011 election, and there were quite a number of things that were not in place. And I remember that Jega then set up the Professor Dele Jinedu committee to review the voter register and the election that took place in 2011. And I had the privilege of being asked to serve as the secretary of that committee. And we worked for about 7 months. There were people like late Professor Iyayi, Clement Nwankwo, and others who served on that committee. And we made a number of recommendations after visiting the various zones in the country. And those reforms, those recommendations, the Jega INEC made a conscious effort to put them into action. And the fact that the next election which he did was adjourned to be one of the best that we had in this country, I think showed the potential about the fact that we are not a basket case as events are turning out to be. And that with gradual reforms and with the level of technology that he started and which the current INEC tried to perfect, we cleaned up the processes in which states were turning millions as voters and so on and so forth. And now we're having more realistic.
I don't know how Justice Uwais was able to, the name of Justice Uwais was able to swallow the fact that people like you and others, played the kind of role that has made that committee a reference point. But what did you talk about? The menace of money. It's manifesting itself as vote buying. It's coming as electoral corruption, and then the political financiers. Were there thoughts? Because I've gone through that report, and people still, there are bits and bits of it that are being implemented.
Yeah.
But the biggest threat right now is the issue of electoral corruption.
I think they were. That committee was very carefully selected. You have people like Ulisa Agbakogba, you have people like Bishop Kuka, and others who had played a credible role in past elections, and then people in the judiciary. So there was a determined effort to make sure that that committee did a job that will stand the test of time. And of course, I think every member of the committee was happy to have Justice Uwais carry the decision as the chairman.
No, I understand. Yeah. That was just...
now, the question of election financing, I remember, was very hotly discussed. And if my recollections are correct, and I think they are, we had mechanism to peg the maximum amount that can be spent on the presidential election. I think then we had fixed 500 million. The fact that significant aspect of, important aspect of the electoral, of the recommendations we made were not implemented by subsequent regimes, and were not translated into the electoral laws that guided the conduct of election, is perhaps the reason why the thing has now had a political implosion, and we have people literally buying the election by spending excessive amount of money in the electoral process. I think people like Professor Victor Adetola, we have been discussing, he was around doing something for CDD, which I chair, whose board I chair. And the issue of election funding came up, and people like him had written extensively about how this could be resolved. But I think our political elite do not have the desire, they don't have the stomach to restrict election excessive monetization of our electoral process. But perhaps that is not all the problem that we have with our electoral processes right now. I think one of the greatest problems we have is the fact that for some reason the use of technology, which is supposed to address people manipulating the process, we seem to have gone back to it, and people want to checkmate the use of technology. And I think that conversation on having the electoral process being credible and being fed by Nigerians that their votes count, will have to address how we use the RF and how we don't use it.
Okay, we're on a home stretch to the end of the program, but I want you to share your thoughts on whatever reforms you think could be added into the electoral amendment that is going on, and then the vexed issue of diaspora voting that you know that everybody, especially there are quite a lot of Nigerian workers abroad as well. What can we do very quickly to ensure that we improve on electoral integrity in just about a minute?
Okay. Yeah. On diaspora voting, I think this the National Assembly should give legislation to support this because we have our embassies all over the country, all over the number of countries, and Nigerians are very active politically, even outside outside our shores, and they should be allowed to exercise their vote because deep down they are soulists here in Nigeria. On issue of what we need to do, we need to mobilize Nigerians to interrogate those things that are preventing elections from being credible. We need to, now look, one of the recommendations we made was that we should merge the INEC and the State Independent Electoral Commission. The fact that in all the states across parties, all the 36 states, the ruling party wins 99.9% of all the so-called election is one indication that the state electoral
we will be bringing you back for that conversation on State Independent Electoral Commission, because there is the principles of federalism and all of that, but we don't have the time for that now. This is where we draw the curtain on this episode of Electoral Reform Half Hour, and we wish to specially thank our very distinguished guest, Comrade John Oda, for your time and contributions on the program. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, sir.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Electoral Reform Hour is brought to you by the Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa with support from MacArthur Foundation. We are live every Saturday from 8:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. and on Sundays at 2:30 p.m. on same station. You can contact us on our social media handles showing on your TV screens. Thank you for watching. I am Ezenwa Wagu.